All right. Hi, this is Greg Anderson, and this is the Living in Carver County podcast. It's an insider's guide to the people who make with an insider's conversation. I'm a little over, I'm under sleep. I didn't get enough sleep last night. It is an insider's conversation with the people who make Carver County the best place to live, work, and raise a family. And I have a kindred spirit on today. His name's Mike Huang, and Mike is the editor and the sort of he's the main man at the Carver County Local News, an online news service for Eastern Carver County. And we're going to dig way deep into all the cool things that he's got going on. But I like to start, Mike. Thanks for agreeing to be on, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me on. And thank you for promoting me to editor because
Ah,
because we actually have an editor who actually has a professional editing background and so like that's not a wheelhouse that I ha or skill that I have in my wheelhouse.
all right.
So
Well, you know,
but
what do they
yes,
say? My dad used to say it's kind of a lousy job that can't afford a foreman. So,
exactly. But thank you very much for having me on. It's like great to be here. And yeah, so it's so you know, it's so I'm with the Carver County Local News. I'm one of the four board members. And in addition to that, before coming to Carver County Local News, I was actually a council member in Chaska for 6 years, and loved serving in Chaska. And when the Chaska Herald had closed back in April of 2024, there was just this desperate need to like find a replacement for it. And it's one of those things I'm passionate about serving our community, but I felt that I couldn't serve the community in terms of standing up the newspaper as well as being a city council because it's an inherent conflict of interest, right? You can't be the news and then put out the news at the same time. So I
well,
felt like, I have to pick one.
in this day and age, there's people that would challenge that notion. But let's before we get too far into the news, maybe talk a little bit about you personally. Like
Yeah.
where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? How's it that
Yeah.
you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, so I grew up in so I was born and raised in San Francisco, or born in San Francisco, spent some of my early years in San Bruno, California, but really grew up in Fremont, California. Fremont, California, the name may sound familiar for those of you who own a Tesla, because that's where the first Tesla factory was in Fremont, California, still is. And so I grew up there. I think Fremont, California, the best way to describe it was probably like in a lot of ways, kind of like Eden Prairie, right? It's a suburb of a major city. It's pretty big in itself. It's got a good population, increasingly diverse, kind of on the edge of the metro. But then at the same token, it's kind of got its own vibe to it, right? And so growing up there, went to high school, graduated from high school in '89, and then went to college in San Luis Obispo. Go Cal Poly, go Mustangs, right?
And Pismo Beach.
Yep, Pismo Beach in that area. Yeah, and it's probably one of the best places to live. Go to school if you really want to find ways to not go to class. Yes, it's a great place to live. I mean, the weather is absolutely amazing. You're like what 10, 15 minutes from the beach. It's like you have the beach, the ocean, you have mountains, great hiking, great mountain biking, just some phenomenal stuff around the area. Great food culture there. It's a small town. Probably at the time I was there, it's probably about 40,000 people. So not super big. Um, Probably about the same size as Chaska, but not as many immediate neighbors in the area. So you're
Mhm.
kind of like this isolated little community there. Love living there. And then after college, I took a job working for a management consulting firm, and I had me traveling like coast to coast for almost like 5 years. And then while I was working for that company, I was actually working a project based out of DC, and I met my wife, who was actually had moved to DC from Minnesota.
Oh wow.
So yeah, so we had actually, at that point, I said, this traveling thing isn't for me because I was basically spending like Monday through Friday and like on the East Coast, and then Saturday and Sunday on the West Coast. And so
Oh man.
living a life there, it sounds super glamorous, and those who have done it before know that it's absolutely just the opposite of that. Spending most of your life in an airport, whether even getting upgrades to first class most of the time, it just absolutely was not worth it. Um, So I moved back to California or stayed back in California and took a different job and then at the time we kept in touch and then we said, hey, we should probably get together sometime. So we got together and kind of the rest is history. And then it was the who's drawn the short straw to move to the other person's home, right? And
Sure.
I think the California cost of living and traffic were not really desirable factors in moving out to California for Casey. So so Minnesota, here I come. No regrets. Love Minnesota. It's been a fantastic place to live and to raise kids and raise family. It's been it's been fantastic. So
What year did you
absolutely.
move here, Mike?
Oh gosh, we moved here probably about 2000 is when
Okay.
I want to say 2000, it's just off the top of my head. But
Okay.
yeah, yep. So I've been
All right.
here, been here about 25 years, give or take. Yeah.
Yeah. We moved in 94 and I say, well, we're still carpetbaggers a little bit, but so what motivated you to get involved in local politics?
Well, I've always been fascinated with being part of, local government and started even like was in high school, I was always raised my hand to be part of student government and volunteered and things like that. And in college I did as well. And and then when I started working, I kind of just put all that aside because I was focused on having a career, right? So of course, and you can't really do this type of thing if you're like on the road, like if you're on the road all the time, 100% travel, it just doesn't make sense. And then when I moved to Minnesota, I really wasn't that involved, wasn't that engaged. And then someone said, "Hey, there's this plot of land over here," and we got this notice about this plot of land over in the corner of 41 and Hunter Mark that they're going to do some development on. They said, "Oh, they want to build like a big shopping mall and a Best Buy over here." I'm like, "What?" So I said, like, some of our neighbors and I, kind of were piqued our curiosity, and like, what's going on? So we kind of saw that. I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. And then later on, they changed that proposal into this medical center, which became the 212 Medical Center. And at the time, because we didn't know what it was about, we were really concerned about like traffic around noise, especially because they said that, oh, there's going to be like a helicopter pad that's going to operate 24/7. So we had this idea that was going to be like an airport next to our houses here. And so at the time, I think that, we were really concerned. So we went to city council meetings and, and I felt like we weren't being heard. We weren't being listened to by, by council at the time or by planning commission at the time. And so, and I'm the type of person who says, what, rather than just complaining about it from afar, why not get involved and be part of the solution? And
Not
so,
just complain on Facebook?
no, no, yeah, exactly. This is like louder than complaining on Facebook, right? I'm just gonna go run for office, right?
Yeah.
So I actually ran for office in 2008. I ended up not getting elected that cycle, um, but then I think that because I tried to run my campaign with integrity, so I wasn't like bad mouthing anybody. I said, look, this is why I'm running. I want to do some good things here. I want to like be part of the solution, make sure that residents are being heard. And and then I think that at the time, Mayor Van Isle was, or Gary Van Isle was mayor, and he and the council there recognized that I wanted to be part of the solution. I want to be involved, and they appointed me to a planning commission. And then I served in planning commission for ultimately 9 years. I think I was chair for 5 of them, and it was really incredibly rewarding, and it was great for me personally because I kind of felt like I could be part of that solution, be part of the conversation, say when there's concerns, we hear you. Like, how can we make this better? How can we find that middle ground that helps all of us be successful as a community? So that was sort of re-sparked my interest, that whole 212 Medical Center sort of re-sparked my interest in being part of the solution. And then, from there, I can continue it on. And when an opportunity came up for council, then I said, yeah, let's do this. So yeah, so I'm really, really glad to, I had the opportunity to serve and, certainly no regrets about anything I've done there. And then when this came about with like with the newspaper and we
Hold
didn't
on,
see
hold
like
on.
the, oh
I
yeah.
want to talk about that a little bit. So let's talk about I mean, because like local government. I mean, you're
Mhm,
talking about, in a democracy, being as close to the vote, and have how it impacts people. It's
mhm,
hard to imagine anything that's closer to the voter than like city council, certainly planning
Yep,
commissions, but elected officials, planning or city council and school board, probably the closest people have. So
absolutely.
in the course of, going out and campaigning, what are some of the insights that you got from your constituents that, either confirmed your opinion about things or perhaps changed your opinion about, the way things were functioning at the time, in Eastern Carver County?
Yeah, I would say that at the time, a lot of the feedback that I got, and I went and I made a conscious effort to go knock on every door I could knock on at the
Hmm.
time. And so that's a lot of doors. So when you think of like Ward 4 in Chaska, that's like, 4,000 something residents.
Maybe just give people who don't know where word for is, maybe just give
Yeah.
them a rough
Yeah.
idea of what you're
So
talking
so
about.
Chaska so Chaska has a ward system. So when you vote for like city council members and a mayor, the mayor represents the entire city. So you're basically picking for the mayor at large amongst the entire community of Chaska. But then if you look at Chaska and sort of divide it, roughly speaking, right? It's not exact, but roughly speaking, Highway 41 is sort of the divider between sides here. And and then 41, and then roughly speaking, kind of north of, gosh, I guess Angler, I guess, right? There's some pieces that go in and out just because
Mhm.
the population's been changing. But roughly speaking, it's kind of this quadrant, right? So Ward 4 is approximately the northwestern corner of side of Chaska, and Ward 2 is the southwestern. Oh, sorry, that's Ward 1 is the southwestern, and then 2 and 3 are the other sides, on the other side of Chaska, on the eastern side of Chaska.
Mhm.
And so I represented that northwestern corner of Chaska.
Okay.
But ultimately I was like, door knocking on like everyone in the ward and or everyone I could in the ward. And I would say that most people, honestly, the biggest insight I had was that most people had no idea what happens at local government because everybody's paying attention to what's happened at the national level. Almost everyone knows who the president of the United States is. Everyone knows who like the Secretary of Defense is. But the mayor, oh, I don't know. I'm not really sure. It's like, do you know
Mhm.
who your city council person is? No idea.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of the time, I'd say probably 8 out of 10 people have no idea who the city council person is. And honestly, I think I was one of those people too, because I remember when Jay Rowe was running for election, back in like when I moved in, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm one of your neighbors." I'm like, you are? Who are you? What do you do? Right? So,
Yeah, if you really want to see their eyes glass over, ask them what the county commissioners do. But but okay. All right. So this awareness thing, which is kind of a good segue, and
Mhm.
it's even harder. I mean, there was, they won't, when the Herald was around, you had a weekly newspaper that was
Mhm.
giving people, that was reporting on
Yep.
what you were doing, for example, on on planning and certainly what city council was doing
Yep.
and what was happening. And so, maybe talk about the Herald, from your perspective, as a paper, were you pleased with it? Was it a challenge for you? I mean, I know a lot of elected officials have different perspectives on,
Yeah.
media, but I'm just curious what your take was on it.
So what I'll say is that the Herald was generally speaking really, was well managed for quite a long time. I know Mark Olson was the editor of the Herald, and he's a great guy. He did his utmost to do the best job he could to make sure that was fair, it was balanced. It covered the news, it covered as much of the community happenings as he absolutely could. They were and from as far back as I can remember, they were always kind of short of resources. They could always use a good photographer, another writer, or something like that. And I think it's one of the challenges with just no local newspapers in general because they're small, right? Even as part of a larger newspaper group, they have limited resources. So because really at various times, even early on, and when I first moved in the early 2000s, it was really Mark and a couple of reporters, and they were like doing all the news and photography and everything. So it was never like a 20-person shop. It was always more closer to like a 3 or 4 person shop, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So at most, right, with a couple of other stringers who people would like bring on other articles along the way. But it was a small operation, and they were part of this larger group that would occasionally provide like larger general interest articles, right?
Right. Well, they had the
Um,
paper in Shakopee and the Chan Villager,
mhm,
and so yeah, you had kind of some joint regional reporting, and then the local.
yeah,
And then for a while it seemed like they were getting some of these reporters were like right out of college,
yeah.
and there was a gal there for a while, and I'd go to some of these meetings, and then I would read the article and think, was I at the wrong meeting? I
And I think that's a challenge because when you think of it, when you go like when someone goes to college for journalism, do they want to write for a small community they've never heard of before? Because they may never have ever been here or lived here, and they got a degree in
Mhm.
journalism, but they just need a job, right? So their dream may be to write for the Star Tribune, the New York Times. They want to write for the Atlantic. They want to write for something, right? They want to they want to write for Forbes magazine or something, right? But they want to write, they want to
Yeah,
write big meaty articles that are going to change the world rather than covering a city council meeting in a town that, most people haven't heard of in the United States, right? So I think that so the challenge for, for a lot of, for staffing and organizations, finding journalists who have the skill or getting them up to skill or getting them up to that, helping them along
right,
in their
right,
career path. And then also retaining them too, because oftentimes by the time you get them to a place that they're kind of ready for the next step, then they'll take that next step and go somewhere else.
sure.
And I think I don't think it's an uncommon challenge, in small local newspapers because, unless someone just falls in love with the community, it's, oh my gosh, I just love it here and I would really raise my family and stay here, then there's a pretty good chance they're going to move on to, to
Well,
follow that dream.
yeah, and the challenge isn't necessarily it's the challenge is actually is there a local newspaper. So, and I
Hmm.
think it
Yeah.
changed when they were bought out. When the parent company was bought out, you could kind of see what was happening. And not to pick on the reporters, there was one person in particular, but yeah, I think collectively though, overall, I thought they had some actually really good reporters. In
Yeah,
fact,
they did.
and certainly of the last couple of years that they were open, I thought they did an exceptional job.
Yeah, I think the challenge, what I saw was that, if you look at like the broader picture, is that, like in the early 2000s, you think of what the news landscape looked like in the early 2000s. Where did people get their news? This was, you have to kind of reframe our perspectives or our memories. This is before Facebook. The internet, if you wanted something on the internet, you had to go look for it in either Google or Yahoo searches, right? And then, so news was something is like, oh, I'll go to the website for Fox News, I'll go to the website for CNN, or I'll go to ABC News or whatever it is wherever your news is, you're going to that news.
Hmm.
Um, so most people, when they looked at what they got from news locally, it probably came from either one of the local TV stations, right? Like, CCO, Fox 9, Care 11, right? It came from the Chaska Herald or it came from the Strib,
Hmm.
right? That's pretty much where news came from.
Right.
And it came from, or maybe the radio too, right?
Yeah, you
Whichever
didn't
radio
have, I
station
mean,
too.
occasional online forums, but that was usually more people. Basically, it was kind of a precursor to the comment section on Facebook.
Yeah,
Some of
exactly.
those
It's like,
chat
I mean,
rooms
people
and
aren't
things.
trolling Craigslist for like news, right?
Right, right.
I mean, be trolling Craigslist for other things, but definitely not news.
Yeah, yeah.
So in like used cars, maybe, right? So, but it's kind of interesting because then, the early 2000s, things started to shift. Social media started getting much bigger, and that's when this cultural shift happened because not just the prevalence of online news, but also the smartphone. And the reason why that changed things is suddenly news wasn't something you had to go to your computer to get. Guess what? News came to you on this, right?
Sure.
And suddenly you had news at your disposal all the time because you could go look it up on the web. And guess what? If you were on Facebook or if you were on, or MySpace at the time or some of these other were like, these other different competing, services, well, guess what? The news came to you. And of course, back then it was just like this frivolous stuff of like fashion and like food and things like that, nothing important. But over time, media properties like, television and newspapers and others started realizing that was a great medium to start pushing news, as did
But
other
well, and then the
news.
fragmentation of it too. I mean, I
Yes.
think, I mean, going back into the dark ages when I was young, you got your news from three sources.
Yeah.
So there was a baseline, and that really shifted a lot
Yeah.
when you started having an ideological vantage point from, um, I mean, when the fairness doctrine went away, you had this kind of both feet on the gas, no foot on the brake in term from an ideological perspective. So
Yep.
then people sort of migrated towards their biases.
Right.
So
And and it was became and that's where those echo chambers really started forming because when you start listening into things of only your bias, it just reinforces that bias. And then other people, I think, and this is even before a lot of those, those other actors started coming into it, but just people started like, talking about things amongst their group of friends, and then well, if the group of friends that you keep around you happens to have a like mindset around like a particular viewpoint, well, then you're just kind of hearing nothing but that. So, oh, everybody I know believes that, so that must be what everyone thinks. Like,
sure.
well, is that really true? And then I think others realize that they can manipulate those things, work with the algorithms and stuff, and that's when things start getting really messy.
Yeah,
But the challenge for us as a small community is that even though we're like 30,000 people, right? It's that there's still each person is still subject to all those different forms of communication. So now if you look at someone who's just like, let's say a working parent who's got a couple of kids and you have things going on, you've probably got like different school stuff, sports stuff, you've got your work stuff, your after work stuff, you have maybe some other club or group of friends you hang out with and do things with. Well, guess what? You have like five things right there. And so suddenly you're already like just trying to manage your schedule, so whenever news fits in happens to be conveniently on this thing, right?
sure.
And so like so whatever little news you get is from the most convenient point, but then we have that time to be critically thinking about it starts evaporating because we don't have time to critically think, oh my gosh, this is like crazy what's happening in there. I just saw this article or headline about something. And then people get some emotional response to it, and then they move on to the next thing
Sure.
because they don't have time to really dig into it unless they're really, really like personally tied to that subject or topic, right?
Well, talk about the genesis then of what prompted you and Dan and the others to kind of lean into this and
Yeah.
to try to step into that void because I mean I was sad when the Herald shut down.
Yeah.
I think you and I talked about this before. There was a Pew Research study that said that without local media, in fact it was Wall, California,
Yeah.
that
Exactly.
had that where they with what like 9 or 10% voter turnout they became a charter city and
Yep.
everybody's salaries increased and
Yep.
it was so egregious it had to raise to the level of the LA Times to get
Yeah.
any kind of accountability because there
Yeah.
was nobody was paying attention
Yeah.
and so when the Herald went away that was a big loss. So what was it why you why did you kind of step into that role?
Yeah. So, I kind of brought a different perspective than the others who, are part of our group. And the group that initially was formed, it wasn't just the four of us. It wasn't just me and Dan, Bhakti, and Ruth. It was like there was others involved too, like, Bob Repke, David
Mhm.
Corney, and there was there was a room full of people there. And and for me personally, one of the things that was a driving factor was that, in the past 6 years, I saw the deterioration of the Chaska Herald after it was purchased by this other group. What I saw was that as the ownership group tried to use well there as they cut costs and cut resources for that, there was less content that was focused on our local community. It became more general regional content around the Southwest Metro, which is fine, but the amount of content for Chaska specifically kept getting less and less and less. So what I saw was that people would be coming to council and talking about something they heard as rumor, speculation, or some sort of unfounded non-truth that they had saw on social media, all of those which they got from social media.
Mhm.
Even though the truth was out there in the documentation, but there was no news media publishing it, right? And saying this is what happened at that meeting. And it's really difficult to have a conversation with someone who's really outraged or upset about something when the information they're speaking from isn't actually the facts.
Sure.
So And to reset them is really, really painful because it's like, well, I hate to say it, but the information you've started with isn't true, right? Let's start with what's actually happening. Here's the documentation, here's the information. And I think that it's it's not healthy for communities to have, and it's just one thing for me as an elected official having that conversation with a constituent. But it's a very different thing when you have like two residents just duking it out over things that the both sets of facts aren't true,
Sure.
right? And that's really painful. And we see that at a national level, and we see this, and we see it at the local level now too. And to me, that's just absolutely heartbreaking because how are we supposed to make well-informed decisions as a community about the best things for our community when we can't even agree on what the facts are,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, alternate facts is just not it is not a good solution long term. It's kind of that's the reason I try to stay out of the comments. I'm kind of begging on Facebook today. Apparently, that's a recurring theme. But you get into the comment section, and so someone will say something that on its face is just false, and then there'll be 60 comments,
Hmm.
arguing back and forth when the fundamental premise of the genesis of the conversation was wrong right out of the gate. So it's just such a waste of energy. And then also the not just a waste of energy, but this creation of this acrimony between neighbors.
Yeah,
So that you have people fighting, and the whole premise of what they're talking about is BS.
yeah,
So it's just it's like you
yeah. And I think the interesting thing is and this is, for social media, and it's not just Facebook, right?
right.
It's
No,
whether it's
I
X
get
or
it.
it's Snapchat, right? It's that the two things that really incent engagement are people outraged or people loving something. But outrage gets a lot more engagement than people loving things,
Sure.
right? So it's one of those things where we're like, well, we're going to tap into. You're going to tap into something that's going to get the most clicks because that way I can get more ads in front of people and get their attention, right? So that's a whole different topic in itself. But because of that dynamic, the the challenge that we have is that people might hear someone's opinion and they get outraged by that opinion, and then suddenly they're bringing this to a conversation saying, well, this is just wrong, we're doing this, right? And it's like, well, wait a second here, let's back up. What are the facts we're looking at before we even get to the opinion part, right?
Sure. Yeah, it's
And
hard to have an
and,
opinion about something that you've just made up that how do I don't have
yeah.
a way to address something that's nonsensical, you know, a point counterpoint narrative on when the central premise is, fictitious.
Exactly.
So,
So I think to me, that was one of the things that was important is that how are we supposed to have a healthy community in terms of, we value here in Chaska that small town sense, right? I mean, we're not a small town, right? Let's face it. We're at, cresting 30,000 people. It's not really a small town, but we try to keep a culture of being a small town where you can go to the store and run into people you're just, you're at schools, you're going to run into friends and family and neighbors, right? And it's a place where, we can all feel like, oh yeah, hey, I know Greg or I know Dan or I know whoever, and I see them around town. And it feels like a small town because we have these connections. We have this sense that, if something happens, oh, I heard that someone's house burned down. I'm going to go over there and like take care of them and do something for them. Or if someone needs their deck painted or whatever, like we can offer a hand and people will do that. And it's hard for people to want to do those things and to help others when there's like this animosity out there. Part of like small towns is small towns show up when someone's in need, right? And they kind of know about what's happening because they've heard it through the grapevine. And usually grapevine isn't necessarily 100% factual, but there's enough truth there. People are like, oh yeah, we need to help or we need to do something about this, right?
yeah.
And I think that, how do we foster that sense of community that people feel like this is their home, this is a place that they belong here and they want to be here.
Well,
And
and
it's
people are
those
longing
personal
for that.
connections.
In
Yeah.
my day job, I find that, it's a really compelling offer, this notion of being the best small town in Minnesota, the idea that there's something that connects you other than the color of the jersey that the
Yeah.
school team, the high school team wears. Because as much as the schools become kind of a focal point or a gathering, a
Mhm.
common denominator throughout the community. If you don't have kids, then you're
Yeah.
disengaged. And our kids went through the system, but we're not. I mean, we're not involved
Mhm.
in that anymore. And I
Yep.
think about people coming in, especially like with the Idlewood neighborhood where you have a lot of grandparents coming in, right? So their connection
Yep.
to the community was, moving in to be close to their grandkids. And so they have kind of a once removed or twice removed connection to the school. But once that goes away, then how do you have community? And I
Yeah.
think that's partly why like an Edelwood is popular because they've tried to create community with the clubhouse and the pickleball court and that and I think that's something Chaska's been trying to do for a long time with the community center and the walking trails and the golf courses and things like that is trying to create and then of course all the events trying to create places where you and I are going to bump into each other you know
Yep.
um it was interesting that somebody said I'll do it like if I'm selling when people are moving a lot of times at the closing table I'll say well how did especially like say you from California and your wife from out you're meeting out east although she's Chaska girl but or Minnesota gal but what did you think and they go well it was good and there's some little bit of hesitation and it's like you keep peeling it back and they're like you want to know like I was here 6 years and I never had dinner one time at someone else's house
Hmm.
and it's that's not on you shook your head you didn't even
Yeah.
like oh you didn't even that didn't even like
Yeah.
phase you like oh my gosh that I can't believe that he's
Yeah.
like oh yeah that happens
Yeah.
and then people go well they show me everything they're super nice they'll show me every how to get to anywhere except where they live and and I think that it is, and then again, it's nuclear family and
Yep.
mobility and telecommuting and all this kind of stuff
Mhm.
causes people to move places. But when you start talking to people about what the intention is,
Mhm.
about how there's an intentional effort to go out of their way to create opportunities to be part of something beyond just cheering for the high school team
Mhm.
that you have a
Yeah.
sense of place and a sense of community around that and the ability to continue to foster that I think is really a key differentiator there's suburbs I won't pick on anybody but there's places where you drive around you don't know where one starts and one stops it's completely
Mhm.
arbitrary
Yeah.
like well where am you go down in some of the southern areas there's no beginning, there's no end. It's just like this perpetual, these sort of arbitrary lines, but there's no sense of place. And I think that's really a differentiator. And frankly, in I mean, I think each community in Carver County has kind of a uniqueness about it. It's not like they sort of just blend into something else. So from the paper's perspective, talk a little bit more about how you kind of, got that airplane in the air
Mhm.
and what you're trying to accomplish and, what are some of the needs and that you see both from a community standpoint, but then also for you guys.
Yeah. So from the paper's perspective, we there was probably about a dozen of us in the room, and we knew we needed to stand up the paper quickly because there was this demand, and the longer it would go, the harder it would be. And I think we also had this little debate in the beginning of like, do we try to get funding first, or we try to get content out there? And one of the things that sort of precipitated us getting the site up and running was the fact that the election was coming up. So we actually had our first meeting in like was it July 7th or something like that of last year. And then we said, okay, we need to get this moving. We had some, we didn't need to do all these just like administrative things like, like come up with a name, like who are we? What's our mission statement? What's our charter? What are we trying to do? And then do all the filing paperwork and stuff like that just to, be legitimate as an organization. And then we kind of had this sort of question of like, okay, well, what do we put out there first? And by the time we, got to I think it was probably around August or September, the election was kind of around the corner, and there was some voice who said, we really have an opportunity to basically make an impact right away, which is to get a voter's guide out there.
Hmm.
And so, because of that, we made the decision that, okay, let's get the voter's guide out there. Went out to all the candidates. I think there were about 30 candidates. And out of the 30 candidates who we basically put the questionnaire or survey out to, we got responses from 27 of them, I recall,
Wow.
which was fantastic for like an organization that no one's ever heard of, right? We haven't published anything at this point. And so we put together that, Jeff Holmquist, who's our editor, he comes from a newspaper background. He was, kind of to, take the helm of like leading us through that and putting together like something that would go on the website, as well as putting it like a PDF version that people could download too. And from that, we got that out there on October 8th, and that was our first thing we actually put on the website. And I think from that we got about 1,600 hits on that. For considering we were like a nobody site that no one's ever heard of, to get 1,600 hits out of the gate between, that first month was like a big deal, right? And so that's 600, 1,600 people who said, "Oh, I want to see what's going on and see see who these candidates are and find information." And I think it was great that we were out there, great to be a part of that. And because the difference between us and others was that we were the only one who focused on Chaska-Chan, Carver, and Victoria, right? Everybody else was focused on like Waconia, or focused on, on Minnetonka, or focused on the metro, right?
or broader state, you know.
Yeah, the broader
I mean,
state, right?
yeah, you go
Yeah.
down ballot. I mean, everybody, people think elections, they think president, but I mean, you go down ballot, you're voting on judge, you're voting on the sheriff, you're voting on school board, you're voting on, whether
Yeah.
it's sometimes rough. I mean, referendums tend to get people's attention, but beyond that, and then
Yeah.
without, how do you know? I mean, what are you voting for? The way you like their name looks on a ballot? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that honestly, if the way that I take it that a lot of people vote, especially those who don't know who their city council person is that are things going fine? I'll just vote for the incumbent. And if things just crap, I'm not voting for the incumbent, right? And that's pretty much just that simple.
or they have one pet issue, you know.
Exactly. Or they have
I
an issue.
mean,
Yep.
when the well, I won't get too far into that. There was a community where they were putting in an apartment building, and people were mad about it, sort of on a faulty premise to begin with, and they basically, voted all the incumbents out, including the
Mhm.
mayor. And
Mhm.
then the building came, and this is something closer to my heart because it was the CDA building. We're talking about Carver.
Mhm. Yep.
And when the first apartment went in, people, these meetings were going to 1, 2 in
Mhm.
the morning with people
Yeah.
just losing their minds.
Yeah.
And then the subsequent building, which we're going to be doing the ribbon cutting, the second building, which we're doing ribbon cutting next month,
Yep.
when they, in the public hearing, you know how many people showed up? Zero.
Yeah.
It just wasn't, it was all, it was, to your point
Yeah.
before about the getting all lathered up, and then the intensity of fear is so much more of a motivator, that everybody was so worried about something that, as it turned out, was completely um, unnecessary.
Yep.
There didn't need to be anything around that was a cause for consternation, but yet people were just, I mean, passionately, you know, against this project, which is, by all accounts now, 10 years later, has been a wonderful addition to the community.
Yep.
So
Fear and uncertainty and doubt, that FUD, right, it can be a tremendous driver for decisioning, but unfortunately, it's not
we just make
accurate.
sure our audio is good. It was FUD.
Fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
There you go.
Yes,
All right.
it can be a
I don't
tremendous
want my,
motivator.
otherwise my podcast gets a different rating.
Like, no, we're not like upping the rating here.
Yeah, yeah. Mature audiences only.
It's like, but those elements can be a tremendous motivator for people to get engaged. But the problem is that they're not good points in which to make decisions, right?
Right,
If we
right,
made all of our decisions based on fear, uncertainty, and doubt, we'd probably be living in caves still, right?
right, right.
It's one of those things. It's like it's good information helps us to make better decisions. And at the time, part of it was that there were also no other buildings like that were going up in Carver. And so, and to have something like high density in Carver that had this below market
Median
value
income. Right,
median
yeah.
income kind of component was a big deal, right? It was kind of groundbreaking in that area. And so I think a lot of people were just outraged because their vision of what that was, they would say the only thing I can relate it to is what I hear about from like downtown Minneapolis or some other like Detroit or some others or Nashville or something or some other cities that have these like low income areas and think, oh, that's what it's going to be like, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, no, it's not going to be like this, right?
Well,
And
yeah,
so it's
and
a
we
different,
could do a
yeah.
whole podcast on that. In fact, I'm actually going to. We're having one of the subsequent episodes this season will be the executive director for the CDA, to talk about some of these projects and the
Mhm.
challenges when you're
Yeah.
going into certain communities about perception that people have coming in. But getting back to the paper, um,
Mhm.
paper's an interesting term, but the news publication.
We still
Um,
call it a paper.
I know, right? I still refer to my phone as a cell, even though it's digital. But um, so what are some of the what are some you mentioned how you got a great start because of the
Mhm.
the voters guide. What are some of the other wins that you're proud of at this point? I mean, now you're just not quite a year in.
Yeah. So not quite. So so given where we are, we've got at this point we have coming up on 1,500 email subscribers or email list, and so those are people who get the either get articles as they're come out, or maybe they get a digest of some sort that's that's either daily or weekly. There's probably and we have about 1,500 Facebook followers who again get our news through Facebook notifications. They're not all the same people or in email, so there's different audiences there. We're growing our Instagram is small but growing. Um, and I think that on a on a daily basis, we get a couple thousand people actually looking at the site on a daily basis, which is actually a pretty big deal.
Hmm.
So, we covered on a daily basis more than we did our first month, right? And
Sure.
that says a lot. And we have like like well over a dozen writers who like contribute to this contribute, and that's so important because as a nonprofit volunteer organization, then this is and I want to emphasize that no one's getting paid for this, so no one's actually making any money off of this. The people who are helping to build this and contribute to this are doing this because they care about the community and they have something they wanted to share about what's going on and help to get the news out or to help the community.
Hmm.
And that's so important because these are people going out of the way, taking their own personal time to try to do a good thing for the community. And we're trying to make sure that while we're doing this along the way, that we're also doing good quality work. And by having people at, people having people in the editorial side who are leading the ship, who have a professional journalism background, helping to guide those of us who are volunteer, like you could say, like we're, because we're not true journalists in the sense that we didn't go to school to study journalism. We didn't work for commercial newspapers or magazines, right? We're learning the craft as we go. And but at the same token, they're providing some of the tools of like, jumpstart kind of kits and things like that to help people learn how to be good journalists. So that way we can create the same quality that you'd find in the Chaska Herald, right? And I think that's the bar that we're constantly striving to achieve. And so we're always learning, we're growing, and being agile in our approach. So if something happens, let's take that. What can we learn from it? How can we improve? Whether it's our
Sure.
processes, the way we engage people or engage our own writers, and make sure that we're putting out a good quality. And at the same token, trying to keep everyone excited about what we're doing because what we're doing is so important. And news is a different sort of product um, than like let's say if you're making like cell phones, right? Or you're making like some widget, right? Because news has a really short shelf life.
Sure.
So when you talk about like a news story, like let's say that the Chaska Hawks play Chanhassen, right? And in boys football. So, when you want to see the articles, as soon as the game happens, you want to see the article, but 2 weeks out isn't going to cut it,
Right.
right?
Nobody's
So
reading about last year's matchup. Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
you've got to get it out really quick and it's got to be timely. And then once it's out there, then
And
as
accurate.
people see it, then after a couple days, then they're looking for the next thing, right?
Sure.
So the news is this constant stream of information. So it's a challenging business because you always have to be kind of feeding the funnel of what's coming in and what's going into that publication.
Well, and
Um, yeah,
the commodity in 2025, listening to all the myriad of things that I listen to, the most valued commodity is attention.
yeah,
And so I mean, you're fighting with a lot of there's a lot of competition for that whatever amount of
yeah.
bandwidth that people, that limited amount of bandwidth that people have to focus on different things. And
Hmm.
So, and and there were a lot of people that didn't read the Herald. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm guilty of that. I mean, I try to be as engaged as I can, and there were times I get 2 or 3 days behind. I get the strip, and and I
Mhm.
think, God, are they publishing two a day? How, where the hell did these come from? Like, how come there's so many papers here?
Yeah. And that's when you actually had papers to lean on because it was just there on your table, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, we're
So,
also facing, yeah, we're also facing kind of this other interesting challenge too, that the paper is this tangible thing as you're just talking about, right? It's sitting on your table, you get a stack of them there, but not everybody has a device or has a phone, right? There are people who read who don't use social media, who aren't technology people, and so I'm just like signing off this stuff, or maybe they just haven't learned this stuff, right?
well,
And so
it's a
they have
different
a device.
experience in your lawn chair on your deck reading a
Yeah,
paper than it is on your lawn chair, staring at your screen.
it's very
Um,
different. Yeah.
and in that on that device, there's so much.
Mhm.
Um, pull to divert that attention to, whether the phone rings or your text, your ping goes off because you're getting a text, or I get in my car and, I've got Bluetooth and the emails, it'll start going bing, 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 bing. My mother, 80, I was in Wisconsin last week. My mom's 87 and we were in the car and when, it took a second, while we were driving for the Bluetooth to sync up. And then all of a sudden there was just this dump of emails. And so it's like, all these little things pinging all the time are kind of, you know,
Mhm.
just even if you're not paying attention to it, it still eats up RAM, right?
Yes,
It's
it does.
still taking some of that consciousness away, and so you have this kind of scattered attention or scattered focus. There's a book I just read called Stolen Focus, and it kind of did a deep dive on how intentional this is to kind of keep us, I want to say stupid because if you can't concentrate on something, you can't get deep and there's so much pull. So I mean, I see that as a huge challenge and I'm really appreciative of what all of you are trying to do because to your point, it's really necessary to know what's going on locally, you know?
Absolutely. And I think
So
that one, yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
I think that and for us, one of the things that is really we feel that we've been able to really make an impact is by getting news out there and information out there that people want to see and people need to see. Now we're as as successful as we are we 100%? Absolutely not, right? There's definitely gaps in what we can cover because as a volunteer organization, one of the things we lack is that the ability to staff someone at all of the council meetings for all the four cities, right? Like the Chaska Herald would have someone who's a paid writer who said, okay, I'm going to have you pay you to sit through all the council meetings and watch all the council meetings for Chaska, for Chan, Carver, and Victoria. And so that way, whatever comes up, then you can write a piece about it. If there's nothing newsworthy because there's just all consent or whatever it was, at least you were there, you saw it, and there was nothing to report. But it's really difficult to get to find volunteers who want to sit through a council meeting every 2 weeks, right? Because it could be like an hour, or it could be 5 hours long, right, on a Monday night, right? And to say, I'm going to volunteer to do this, and then to write an article about it afterwards, which takes time too. And to do this week after week after week. And
Sure.
so it's that's one of the challenges we face is to be able to get complete coverage on all these things. And we'll cover when we can and look through like if we find hey there's a contentious meeting, we'll go back through the video and watch it and see what we can pull from it. But it's challenging because so finding enough writers to keep the flow. Because unlike a traditional newspaper where you have someone who you're basically paying at least 40 hours a week to work on the newspaper, volunteers may put in like 5 or 10 hours at most, right?
Mhm.
Because they have day jobs too. And
Sure.
so the ones who contribute a lot are contributing, maybe around that time, maybe more, maybe less. Some writers may contribute like one article a month or something, right? And we're just grateful to have that. So being able to cover it means we need a lot more writers than you would if you were a commercial newspaper that had full-time staff. And then also having like operations, right? So we have things like, running the website and the back end services, to keep, for example, the events page, the obituaries, and all the responding to, email requests and things like that. that all takes time, and that
Sure,
takes people
sure.
to do that. Not to mention just keeping the infrastructure going and updates for advertisements and sponsorships and stuff like that. And then, so one of the things so a couple of things we're focused on right now are raising funds to build the long-term runway for the organization. So that way we can have a full-time editor. And the reason why this is important is that full-time editor will allow someone to basically devote as their job time to cover those things, such as some of the council meetings, and then make sure that during the day, if there's breaking news and things like that, those things can get covered. Because as volunteers, I'm at work and I'm not looking at what's going on and around Chaska. So there's a car accident. I can't just drop my everything and run over there and cover it. I've got my day job. I got to pay the bills.
Sure.
But if this is someone paying their bills, they can go over there, take care of it, cover it, get some pictures, do some interviews, and then put it out there. And that's the beauty of what we need is we need to like staff it at least minimally to make sure that's there, as well as making sure that we have staffing to fund all the operations and some of the operations things that like every organization needs, which are really mundane, that we need volunteers to help with, are things like we need someone who has QuickBooks skills on the to help us with the accounting and taxes and things like that, right? It's right now it's just Dan and I doing our best to try to muddle through this, right? And we're not tax people, so we're just trying to figure this out as we go.
Okay, so I'm
And
going to
then web
stop. Just I want to
operations and stuff,
recap,
right?
just to make sure we're
Yeah.
on. So number one, if people have a capacity to write, that this would be an opportunity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Number two, funding.
Yep.
If you think this is something that's valuable, then you're not opposed to people making financial contributions,
Yep.
correct?
And if you
And
know someone or you know an organization who'd be interested in being a sponsor, and we're willing to bring on sponsors who would, we could certainly have sponsors there and have sponsorship packages available, and talk about different sponsorship or an advertising with us as well. We definitely have options.
okay. And then the third one was soft skills. If
Mhm.
somebody has bookkeeping skills, for example, or what other types of skills would you be um,
And
grateful?
like web operations is another one.
Okay.
So if
Okay.
people have like skills like WordPress and and managing websites, that sort of thing. And also board members who have like experience with or people who who have experience with like either sales or business development to help with that development. That goes back to the fundraising piece of it. Because I'm not a salesperson, and none of my other compatriots on the board happen to be salespeople. So that's an area where we're a little bit, out of our element. And, we've been getting support from people and introductions, but it's, something that, we work hard to do the best we can. But, certainly having someone who has that experience and expertise would take us a lot further.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I know we're coming up on an hour here. So, is there anything else any parting? I'll make sure to have a link, of course, to the
Mhm.
site, but is there anything else that you'd like to, that people to know at this point?
I think spread the word that we're out here. And when we were at River City Days and we were at the Chan Business Expo and a number of other events, like Victoria and so forth. And I was really surprised at how many people just didn't even know we existed.
Sure.
And so just spread the word that we're out here, that there is a newspaper. People said, I wish there was a newspaper out here. There is. It's just digital now. And we're here, we're publishing, we're doing our best to get the word out about important topics, whether it's the school board or whether it's city councils or just construction happening or whether it's like the dean's list at the high schools. We're trying to get the word about all these things so that way people will be just as informed with the facts that they had before, and to help to make this keep this being a great community that it is.
All right. Well, good. And buy the swag. Uh,
Yes,
buy,
buy the swag.
buy the swag. Subscribe. Put it on. Put links on. Link it up on your Instagram or on your Facebook or on tweet about some of the art. Forward some of the articles.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, just let's get it out.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do have that merch store as you mentioned. So yeah, like we're always looking, we're trying to get that word out there, buy
Yeah,
some merch and proudly wear it too. So,
yeah,
or drink
exactly.
from
If
the
I had
Carver
seen it
Community
before, I
mug.
would have had a t-shirt on for this because we were on Zoom. So, all right. Well, Mike, thank you so much. I appreciate all you're doing for the community, and I appreciate the opportunity to get to visit with you a little bit. I know, we keep crossing paths at social functions. You're one of those guys that's always whether it's River City Days or Taste of Chaska or going to Latin Music Festival in a couple
Mhm.
weeks or, Art Wander. So,
Mhm.
thanks for all you do for the community. And I had a great time. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a great time too. Thank you for having me on, Greg.
All right. I'm going to stop recording right now.